Okay, so today we're going to be taking a deep dive into a question that I think has plagued humanity for a very long time. Um, and that you know, is there a double standard when it comes to judging men and women involved in sex work? And the source that we have for today is a Reddit thread from Arno and Stupid Questions. And the title of this thread is, Why Are Women Hated for Doing Sex Work, but Men Aren't for Availing Those Services?
Interesting.
It was posted by a user named Gangsta Claus. And, one of the interesting things about this thread is that it kind of throws in this curveball of online platforms like OnlyFans. So it's not just about, kind of traditional sex work. It's also about, this whole new landscape of digital, kind of interactions and transactions.
Yeah, it really is fascinating to see how technology has kind of blurred the lines, and I'm excited to dive into this Reddit thread and see what people are saying.
Yeah, me too, me too. Okay, so, one of the things that just jumps out right away when you start reading through this thread
Right.
is just like the sheer diversity of opinions. I mean, it really is like opening Pandora's box.
Right.
You have people who are absolutely convinced that men face like serious consequences for paying for sex.
Right.
Like users Sync Demon and Bartaclasher, they talk about historical scandals
Yeah.
and just this general perception that it's like sad or toxic behavior.
Right, like it's almost this unspoken rule that real men don't pay for sex.
Exactly. Exactly. And they even connect it to like broader societal disapproval. They're saying like this negative perception can have real world consequences for men. Like it can impact their relationships, their reputations, their careers.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's not just about individual judgments. It's about how those judgments can ripple outwards and affect a man's life in very tangible ways.
Yeah. And then you have comments like the one from exactly 65536, who kind of throws a wrench in the works by saying like, isn't it dependent on who you ask? They argue that like they haven't seen male groups where bragging about visiting prostitutes is seen as a good thing.
Right, so it's like, are we dealing with like a universal truth here? Or is it more nuanced than that?
Yeah, is it context dependent?
Exact.
And that's where things get really intriguing, because then another user, RexPup, chimes in and they share like these contrasting experiences depending on their social circle. They point out that like tradespeople seem more accepting of men paying for sex, while programmers are like super judgmental.
That's so interesting. It really highlights how social context plays a huge role in shaping our perceptions and, moral judgments.
It's like there's this hidden map of social acceptance. And the rules change depending on where you are and who you're with.
Yeah, totally.
Makes you wonder, like, what are the underlying factors that create these different moral landscapes?
It's a fantastic question, and it's something worth pondering. As we continue our deep dive, like, what are the unspoken rules that govern different social circles? How do they influence our views on, sex work relationships and everything in between?
Right, right. And, like, how do we navigate these complex and often conflicting values in our own lives?
That's the real challenge, isn't it?
It is, it is. Okay, so speaking of judgment and consequences, one user brings up a particularly juicy example, and that is the Ashley Madison scandal. You remember that?
Oh, yeah. How can I forget?
User Good Clean Christian Food reminds us of this online platform for extramarital affairs that got hacked, exposing a ton of men who were seeking discreet hookups.
Yeah, it was a huge scandal. A lot of people's lives were turned upside down.
Totally. And it directly challenges the assumption
Yeah.
that men always get a free pass when it comes to paying for sex.
Right. Because clearly, in cases involving infidelity or breaches of trust, there can be serious blowback, both personally and professionally.
Exactly. But here's the thing. The Ashley Madison scandal primarily involved married men seeking extramarital affairs. Does that make a difference in terms of societal judgment compared to, say, a single man paying for consensual encounter with a sex worker?
That's an excellent point. It raises the question of whether the outrage surrounding Ashley Madison stemmed from the act of paying for sex itself, or from the violation of marital vows and the perceived betrayal of trust.
Right, right. It's like a subtle but crucial distinction.
Absolutely.
Okay, and speaking of complexities, this thread dives into a fascinating modern phenomenon, the rise of the simp. It seems like every other comment mentions this term as a way to ridicule men who financially support women online, especially on platforms like OnlyFans.
Yeah, the simp label is really interesting
Okay.
because it reflects this evolving landscape of digital relationships and financial transactions. It's not just about traditional sex work anymore.
Right.
It's about the perceived power dynamics between men and women in online spaces, particularly when money is involved.
It's like the internet has created this whole new arena for both empowerment and judgment. And it's not just limited to OnlyFans. You see it with Twitch streamers, YouTubers, even Instagram influencers. There's this constant scrutiny of how men interact with and financially support women online, often with accusations of manipulation or desperation thrown around.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, is the simp label a genuine critique of harmful behavior? Or is it a way to police masculinity and reinforce traditional gender roles in a rapidly changing digital landscape?
It's a conversation that's just beginning, and it's one that will continue to evolve as online platforms and digital interactions become even more intertwined with our lives.
I think you're right about that.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already.
Right.
So there's one recurring theme in this thread that we can't ignore, and that is the issue of anonymity versus visibility. One user, Seekin Man, brilliantly sums it up by saying they both are judged. The issue is that the model is visible and the subscriber is anonymous. Hard to scold a ghost.
Wow, that's a powerful quote.
Dick is right.
Yeah, it perfectly encapsulates a crucial dynamic at play. Traditional sex work often operates in the shadows, with men able to maintain their anonymity, while women bear the brunt of public scrutiny and judgment.
Exactly, and it creates this illusion that men are immune to consequences, further perpetuating the double standard.
It's like a vicious cycle.
It is, but with the rise of platforms like OnlyFans, where women are increasingly visible online, that dynamic is shifting. We're seeing women embrace their sexuality and entrepreneurial spirit, building businesses and amassing followings in ways that were unimaginable just a few years ago.
It's a fascinating case study in how technology is disrupting traditional norms and power structures.
Totally. But even with this newfound visibility and control, there's still a pervasive sense that women are judged more harshly than men. And many commenters point to one primary culprit: misogyny.
Yeah, they argue that it's not just about sex work. It's about deep-rooted societal expectations and the sexualization of women in general.
Like user savings hippo 8912 states it plainly. The answer is because it's not about sex work. It's about women. And another user, Capirica, simply says, the answer is misogyny.
Powerful statements.
It's a stark reminder that despite progress in some areas, women continue to face disproportionate judgment and scrutiny based on their gender and perceived sexuality.
It's like this undercurrent that runs through the entire conversation, reminding us that even in a seemingly progressive online forum, these deeply ingrained biases can still rear their ugly heads.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought for sure. We'll be right back after a quick break to delve deeper into this misogyny argument and explore some alternative perspectives on the whole debate.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it.
All right, so we're back, and we were talking about this idea of misogyny and how it kind of plays into this whole double standard around sex work. And one user, Love Calico, brought up this really interesting point about the constant sexualization of women even outside the context of sex work.
She makes a compelling argument.
Yeah, she does.
She's basically saying that, men often interpret everything women do, like from their clothing choices to their social interactions, through a sexual lens.
Right, so this pervasive objectification. That creates an environment where women are constantly judged and scrutinized based on their perceived sexuality.
Exactly. And that makes it that much harder to escape the stigma associated with sex work, because it's seen as an extension of this already existing sexualization.
It's like this underlying societal message that a woman's worth is tied to her sexual purity, which, let's be honest, is a pretty outdated and frankly harmful concept.
Oh, absolutely. It's a relic of a bygone era.
Totally. And this ties back to the historical context we touched on earlier. Centuries of patriarchal norms and religious influences have created this double standard where women are expected to be chaste and pure, while men are given more leeway in their sexual behavior.
Right. It's like these historical echoes still reverberate in our modern perceptions of sex work.
It's as though there's this unspoken assumption that women who engage in sex work are somehow inherently flawed or morally corrupt, while men who pay for those services are simply fulfilling a natural urge.
Yeah, it's a classic case of double standards.
It is.
And it speaks volumes about the power imbalances that still exist between men and women.
And those power imbalances are central to how the Reddit thread unfolds. Many commenters point out that women in sex work are often viewed as victims, either of circumstance or exploitation, while men are seen as the ones in control, making a conscious choice to purchase a service.
Right. It's like this inherent power differential that we can't seem to shake.
Totally, and it makes you wonder if the judgment toward women stems from a place of pity or even a sense of moral superiority. Like, well, those poor women, they must be desperate, or how could they stoop so low?
It's this paternalistic attitude that ultimately reinforces the double standard and fails to acknowledge the agency and diverse experiences of women involved in sex work.
Exactly. It's like we're so quick to label and categorize
Yeah.
without taking the time to understand the individual stories and motivations.
Absolutely.
But what's interesting is that there's also a lot of anger and frustration directed at men who pay for sex work.
Right.
They're labeled as simps, losers, creeps, even enablers of an exploitative industry.
Yeah, it seems like no one escapes judgment in this conversation.
Right. Everyone's getting thrown under the bus.
And it's not just confined to the online world. Many commenters share real-life experiences of men facing social consequences for their involvement in sex work.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, there's this fear that by associating with someone who's paid for sex, you're somehow condoning their behavior.
Yeah.
Or tainting your own reputation.
It's like this unspoken social contagion.
Yeah.
Right? Like you don't want to catch the cooties.
Yeah, exactly. It creates this culture of silence and shame that makes it even harder to have open and honest conversations about sex work.
And it perpetuates the stigma. One user, Jimmerty, shared a powerful anecdote about a guy in their friend group who was caught visiting a sex worker when he was 19. He's 48 now. And they still call him John, even though that's not his real name.
Wow, that's intense. It really highlights the enduring power of shame and stigma even decades later.
It's like that one act continues to define him in the eyes of his friends, overshadowing any personal growth or changes he may have made since then.
Right, and it makes you think about the long-lasting impact of these judgments and how they can shape a person's life.
It's heavy stuff for sure.
And it speaks to a broader societal anxiety around sex and morality. It's as if there's this fear that by acknowledging or even discussing sex work, we're somehow condoning it or threatening the moral fabric of society.
Not like it's this taboo subject that we're not supposed to talk about.
Exactly, but that fear only serves to perpetuate the stigma and prevent us from having nuanced conversations about a complex issue.
It's a vicious cycle, isn't it?
It is.
The shame and stigma prevent open dialogue, which only reinforces misconceptions and fuels further judgment.
We're trapped in this echo chamber of outdated beliefs and moral panic.
Okay, so one recurring theme that stood out to me in this thread is the call for decriminalization or legalization of sex work. Many commenters argue that this would protect both sex workers and their clients, reduce exploitation and trafficking, and allow for better regulation and safety standards.
It's a compelling argument, and one that's gaining traction worldwide.
It is.
By decriminalizing or legalizing sex work,
Right.
we can shift the focus from moral judgment to harm reduction and public health.
Right. It's about creating a system that prioritizes safety and agency for everyone involved.
Exactly.
One user, Parking Mixture 7828, makes an interesting comparison between sex work and other industries, like casinos and pubs, which also prey on addictive demands and have the potential for lasting damage.
That's an interesting parallel.
Right. They argue that if we can accept those industries, why not legitimize and regulate sex work as well?
It forces us to confront the hypocrisy of condemning sex work while tolerating other potentially harmful behaviors.
Totally. And it raises questions about our societal values and priorities, and whether our current approach to sex work is truly aligned with our stated goals of protecting individuals and promoting public health.
It's a conversation that needs to happen.
It does.
It does. So it seems like from this Reddit thread, there's no easy answer to the question of why women are hated for doing sex work, but men aren't for availing those services.
It's a multifaceted issue with deep historical roots, complex social dynamics, and evolving moral landscapes.
And as we navigate this ever-changing terrain of sexuality and relationships, it's crucial to approach these conversations with empathy, nuance, and a willingness to challenge our own deeply held beliefs.
It's not about finding the right answer. It's about engaging in thoughtful dialogue, listening to diverse perspectives, and recognizing the inherent complexity of human experience.
Well said. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, it's like we're still struggling with this idea, that women can have agency and make their own choices, even in a field that's so often associated with exploitation and vulnerability.
It's a real paradox, isn't it?
It is.
We want to empower women, but we also want to protect them. And sometimes those two impulses come into conflict.
And that leads us to a final thought-provoking question for our listeners.
Okay, I like it.
If societal views on sex work continue to evolve, as platforms like OnlyFans gain mainstream acceptance, will the perceived double standard lessen, or will it simply take on new forms?
That's a really good question.
This question that's been swirling in my mind throughout this entire deep dive.
Hmm.
Will we see greater acceptance of both men and women who engage in sex work? Or will the shame and stigma simply shift to new targets? Will the language evolve? Will the judgments soften? Or will the underlying power dynamics remain the same?
I think it's impossible to say for sure, but it's definitely something worth thinking about
Yeah.
and discussing. And that's what we encourage you, our listeners, to do. Share your thoughts, share your experiences. Let's keep this conversation going because it's through open dialogue and critical reflection that we can challenge outdated beliefs and create a more inclusive and understanding society.
Absolutely. And if you're looking for a platform to engage in these conversations, we invite you to check out Shauna Pelage's YouTube channel and the Voices of the Soul podcast. You'll find a vibrant community of individuals passionate about exploring these complex issues and challenging societal norms.
It's a space for open dialogue, respectful debate, and thoughtful exploration of topics that often get swept under the rug.
So don't be shy.
Yeah.
Join the conversation, share your perspective, and let's continue to learn and grow together.
I love that.
All right, that's a wrap on our deep dive into the world of sex work and societal perceptions. We've covered a lot of ground today, from historical context to evolving online platforms. We've explored double standards, power dynamics, and the deeply ingrained biases that shape our views on this complex and often controversial issue.
It's been a fascinating journey, and we hope you've come away with a deeper understanding of the nuances and complexities surrounding sex work. Remember, it's not about finding simple answers or passing judgment. It's about embracing empathy, critical thinking, and a willingness to challenge our own preconceived notions.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, we encourage you to like and subscribe to Shauna Pelage's YouTube channel and the Voices of the Soul podcast. And don't forget to share this episode with your friends, family, colleagues, anyone who might benefit from this thought-provoking conversation. Let's spread the word and keep the dialogue going.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Deep Dive. Until next time, stay curious, keep questioning, and never stop exploring the complexities of the world around us.
See you next time.